SEGA! Sometimes in life, it's kind of fun to be scared. Growing up, I was always fascinated with the horror genre, with movies like John Carpenter's The Thing, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and The Return of the Living Dead being some of my all-time favorites. But what do all of these movies have to do with SEGA? Well, if you were around for the boom of arcade classics coming out in the late 90s, you'd be more than familiar with The House of the Dead. Released in 1996, House of the Dead was an on-rails light gun game that put you straight into the plot of a B-movie horror flick. In the game, you're tasked with infiltrating the mansion of the deranged scientist Dr. Curian and shutting his experiments down once and for all. But it's not going to be easy because the Doctor has created an army of zombies, monsters, and all sorts of creepy crawlies to stop you. The brilliance of House of the Dead was its tongue-in-cheek campiness that relished in you shooting the ever-loving crap out of anything that moved and splattering blood in your face while doing it. The over-the-top violence definitely meant that it wasn't targeted towards children, but if you were a weird kid like me, you probably would have played it anyways. While the game did receive a fair bit of criticism for its excessive violence, I mean, it was the 90s after all, House of the Dead would eventually go on to become a critical and commercial smash, spawning yet another legendary franchise for SEGA with sequels and spin-offs coming out frequently until 2018 when the series released its fifth mainline entry, House of the Dead: Scarlet Dawn. But given that the original game was released over 25 years ago, it was only a matter of time that we would see a remake given SEGA's initiative in bringing back their classic franchises. House of the Dead Remake was developed by the same team behind 2020's Panzer Dragoon Remake, the game that basically jump-started my entire channel. By the way, I'm terribly sorry for subjecting you to my horrible-looking face. I have a lot of dysphoria, and there's only so much that a mere mortal woman can do. So, needless to say, I was extremely excited for Remake, and after playing it through multiple times, I can safely say that this is hands down one of the best remakes I've ever played. That's a lot to take in, I know, but in order for me to explain why I feel that way, we gotta dig a little deeper and discover just what makes House of the Dead Remake such a pleasant surprise. Let's load up our light guns and venture into
The House of the Dead.
At the start of the game, you're given a choice between two different characters, AMS agents Thomas Rogan and Agent G. While there's only a few small differences between both characters, Rogan has more stakes within the actual plot of the game after he receives a distress call from his fiancée Sophie. And that's about it. There's no real plot line in House of the Dead because there doesn't need to be. This is a game that pays loving homage to the 90s, a time where video games didn't have to be 100-hour-long epics to be enjoyable. They just needed to be fun. You point, you aim, you shoot. That's all there is to it. But that isn't to say that Remake doesn't have any modern sensibilities about it. Far from it. To give myself an idea as to how the remake stacks up with the original, I briefly played the Saturn port of House of the Dead, and I found myself genuinely surprised by how well that port holds up, despite it not quite reaching the quality of the original arcade game. But both this port as well as Remake excel in customization to tailor to the player's needs. Because this is a light gun game, you have the freedom to adjust the difficulty, ammo count, reload speed, you name it. In comparison to Megapixel's previous endeavors, I'm glad that you have so many customizable options straight out of the gate. You can use a joystick via the Pro Controller, but the best way to play this game in my opinion is with the gyro controls activated. I was critical of the gyro feature in Panzer Dragoon Remake because it felt like a tacked-on feature for a game that didn't really benefit it that much. But here, that's an entirely different story. The default settings for your aiming cursor can take a lot of getting used to, but after you fiddle with the settings a bit, this game felt like a dream to control. In fact, playing with the gyro controls brought me back to the Wii days when games like Resident Evil The Umbrella Chronicles and Sin and Punishment Star Successor were a thing. Anybody remember those games? Well, anyways, back to House of the Dead. The game is split up into 4 chapters, and while the overall package is abysmally short, clocking in at only 30 minutes, the replayability for this game is high for one reason and one reason alone: branching pathways. Every single playthrough is going to be different depending on your choices, or lack thereof, throughout the game. You see, there's a ton of researchers that can be rescued throughout the story, and if you're successful in saving them, this could potentially put you down a path you've never been before. So what happens on my second playthrough where I'm unsuccessful in saving them? What happens if I shoot this hatch in the floor? Getting a game over gives you a really good idea of just how many different combinations you can get in a single playthrough, and the game is constantly rewarding you just for interacting with the environment. Shoot some boxes off to the side and you might get some extra health, or maybe something to increase your score. I've also seen that you can get new weapons throughout the game, but I have yet to find a single one, and sometimes the game goes to the next screen way too quickly for me to shoot any breakable objects to find them. But that's not the only way you can get goodies. While it may be tempting to let the researchers die for the sake of seeing a new path, it's beneficial to save them because they can oftentimes reward you with health pickups and extra credits to continue your trek through the mansion. And like most arcade games, you're going to need as many lives as you can, as House of the Dead can be pretty damn hard if you don't know what you're doing. Your first instinct may just be to shoot wildly across the screen, but accidentally shooting researchers will take off one of your health torches, and that can sometimes lead to your downfall. On top of that, almost every enemy in the game has a weak point, and this is especially true with the boss encounters. These are admittedly some of my least favorite parts of the game, if I'm being honest. While I really enjoy the designs of the monsters you fight, they definitely require a lot of precision to take down, and if you're not that good with your aim, you might find yourself struggling. But even if you do find yourself struggling, you can always jump into multiplayer with a friend and get some help. Or you could be an introverted geek like me and just use both controllers to blast through the game, like John Wick going after the assholes that murdered his dog. In addition to multiplayer, there's a bunch of different modes to try out both by yourself and with a friend. Horde mode basically amplifies the amount of enemies you face, making for one of the most chaotic experiences I've had with a game like this. You can rack up a ton of points, and considering that the game supports both competitive and cooperative multiplayer modes, House of the Dead Remake makes for an excellent party game. Which kinda makes me laugh in hindsight because Super Monkey Ball Banana Mania didn't have that feature, and yet that was clearly the higher budgeted SEGA game, but that's besides the point. It's clear that replayability was at the forefront of Megapixel's agenda when it came to updating House of the Dead. Achievements, leaderboards, and other unlockables definitely help round out the experience so that there's always something to do. But there's one major problem that holds House of the Dead Remake back from being one of the better entries in the series: the performance. It is incredibly rare when this game can hit 60 frames per second, let alone 30. And this was developed in Unity, the same engine as Banana Mania, so why does this game run so terribly? It's not unplayable by any means, but it can be incredibly distracting at times, and the game doesn't run any better in performance mode. With newer consoles like the Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5, I bet this game could run on better hardware, but I can feel the Switch struggling to keep up with all the blood and guts being blasted on screen. But you know what? I don't really care that much. The game may perform like a potato at times, but the gameplay is tight, consistent, and offers a lot of fun for what it is. If I passed by an arcade and saw this game running in the background, I'd immediately throw down whatever tokens I had just to play it. That is how good it feels to play this game. Now, I can definitely see people criticizing me for being way too forgiving with Remake, but that's just how I feel. I'd rather share my feelings about the things I love than be another cynical YouTuber who wants to hate on everything for the sake of views. House of the Dead Remake took me back to a time I had long forgotten about. A time when you could go to the mall, hit up GameWorks with your friends, have some pizza, and just have a good time. And in an age where things feel like they're at their bleakest, do we really need more cynicism? I just don't see the point. Sure, from a technical standpoint, House of the Dead Remake disappointed me, but I can overlook those flaws because the game is just too much fun to play. Given that Panzer Dragoon Remake eventually made its way to different platforms, I think this game's future is a bright one. And in comparison with Panzer Dragoon, I think Megapixel improved in many different areas. The character models, animations, and presentation are miles better than Panzer Dragoon. And while the music definitely isn't as good as the original game, there's still some great tracks here. The menu theme sounds so much like a Metal Slug track, it made me feel like I was back at Straw Hat Pizza with my cousins again. Admittedly, the voice acting still isn't very good, but you can tell that was done on purpose as another homage to the original series. It reeks of that cheesy 90's dub feeling, and I love it. I had the biggest grin on my face playing this game because I could feel how much love and passion went into making it. The developers clearly loved House of the Dead, and I honestly believe that they knocked it out of the park. If you're on the fence about picking up House of the Dead Remake, I'd definitely say wait for a price drop, or wait for the game to come out on different platforms, as I believe the game will definitely benefit from better performing consoles and PC. However, I think you're going to miss out on some of the fun there is to be had with the features this version of the game has. If you've been dying to get back into some classic light gun gameplay, House of the Dead Remake delivers and then some. But for anybody new to the franchise, I definitely think this isn't a bad place to start. If there's one thing that Remake does best, it's that it makes me want to go back and play some of the other games in the series. And if it's conjuring up a new wave of interest in the franchise, then I think it's done its job well. I'm definitely going to be returning to this one for a while.